It is easy to feel like a failure. Failure as a parent, a spouse, or even just as a friend. It's especially easy to feel like a failure in the spiritual life, as we tend to set our goals higher than we can often achieve. In our humanity, we feel that we must be successful to achieve holiness. We make big plans for ourselves that often fall apart. But God desires that we learn to be small rather than big, weak rather than strong, dependent on Him rather than independent of ourselves. The saints had to learn these tough lessons as well. You may be surprised at what they felt to be failures. Saint Bridget had many plans from the Lord that she set out to do. However, nothing she did was ever finished. She longed to be a nun but never even saw a convent in her lifetime. She never had the Pope return to Rome permanently, and she was never able to make peace between France and England. Because of her inability to finish many things in her lifetime, she is known as the patroness of failures, as well as the patroness of mothers and other titles. St. John Newman could be called the scapegoat saint, as he wrote in a letter one day, "All through life, things happen to me which do not happen to others. I am the scapegoat." Out of all the saints mentioned in this video, it's St. John Newman that I feel bad for the most. He is one of those people who is always open for the ball to be thrown to him, but no one ever threw it his way. Often someone would ask him to help in one project, which he would agree to somewhat reluctantly, only to be forgotten that he was originally asked to be part of the project, or even more humiliating, asked to go away. He himself said that his life seemed to be a history of failures. As a student, he was terrible at math and failed. 7 years later, he suffered a nervous collapse while at work. In his old age, he saw with regret how his time had been frittered away and how much he might have done had he pursued only one subject. He had been so often balked, brought into undertakings, and then left in the lurch. Plan after plan had crumbled in his hands and come to naught. When he was 60 years old, he wrote that, although not true to the letter, he felt that he could say that he had received no piece of personal good news for 30 years and more. Nothing but sorrows and anxieties, and all his works had failed. St. Louise de Marillac, the saint who never fit in. Louise was born out of wedlock, and sadly, her mother died shortly after childbirth. Her father remarried, however, his new wife did not like Louise and never accepted her as her own, so she kicked her out when she was 4 years old, and Louise was sent to live in a boarding school. Sadly, her father died prematurely, and his wife never sent in payments, so Louise was forced to leave. To make things even harder, since her father never got around to legally claiming her as his own, she wasn't recognized as a legal heir. Later, Louise felt God's calling to be a nun, but the convent refused her because her stepmother refused to pay for the required dowry. Finally, a little happiness came Louise's way. She married and had a son, but shortly after, her husband fell ill, and Louise had to take care of him every day for the next 10 years until he died. However, God put all these failures to good use, and she ended up meeting St. Vincent de Paul, who was struggling with teaching ladies how to care for the poor for his new order. Having had 10 years of experience of helping her husband, Louise was able to help him teach the women how to handle offensive odors and other things that come with sickness and death. And although God did not desire her to enter a convent in her early life, He did desire that she start her own order with the help of St. Vincent de Paul. Because of all her trials and failures in her life, she is now the patroness of social workers, the sick, the poor, and the penniless. Have you ever heard of the saint who never beat his addiction to opium? This would be St. Mark T. Xiang Xiang, who was a Catholic doctor in China. Contracting a painful disease one day, he treated himself with opium, but accidentally became addicted to it. Despite living a good Catholic life, going to Mass and confession often, and giving free services to his patients, he was unable to kick his habit. Since he went to confession so often to confess this habit, the priest thought he lacked true repentance and told him that he couldn't give him absolution. While most would be offended and angry, St. Mark T. Xiang Xiang accepted this humbly and continued to go to Mass but not receive communion. This lasted for 30 years. God allowed this weakness to be his seeming failure, However, he knew how much Mark desired to overcome his habit. He heard Mark's prayer to die a martyr so that he might instantly go to heaven. In the year 1900, during the Boxer Rebellion, Mark T. Tiang Tiang and 120 other Christians were rounded up to die for their faith after refusing to renounce it. Mark's only request was to be killed last so that he could comfort his family when it was their turn to die. Our greatest call on earth is not to achieve our goals or to see through our plans, but to become dependent on God to unfold His plans for us. After all, we are here to serve Him, not the other way around. Though what the saints went through was indeed very painful for them, it attained them holiness and eventually sainthood, which became quite a success despite their failures. Saint Therese used to call herself Jesus' little ball, for which the child Jesus could do with as he wished. Sometimes he would play with the little ball, and other times he would pierce the little ball to see what was inside, just to throw it in a corner. And then there were times he would press the ball close to his heart. In this analogy and many others that she made, Saint Therese was able to practice self-surrender and let Jesus do with her as he wished, which was to make her a great saint. And even our dear Saint John Newman, despite his many disappointments, understood what God was ultimately trying to do. As he himself said, "It is the rule of God's providence that we should succeed by failure." By losing much, St. John Newman gained much in insight, clarity, wisdom, and holiness, and finally complete surrender to the will of God. Thanks be to God for the failures of the saints. Their failures will be our gain.